Welcome into Locked On Phillies. The Phils get going on another series tonight with the Miami Marlins, and we'll preview a tough stretch upcoming on today's Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Been talking Phils baseball for years over on 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio, a little bit on NBC Sports Philadelphia on television. Happy to be here with you as your host of Locked On Phillies. I want to thank you for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. A nice, quiet, calm, off day yesterday for your Philadelphia Phillies. And the Phillies actually got some help on their off day. Last night, the San Diego Padres lost to the San Francisco Giants in the first game of that series between those two NL West opponents, which means the Phillies are now a full game ahead of the San Diego Padres for the second wild card spot. Now, if you'll remember, earlier in the second half, in the late first half, the Phillies were kind of back and forth with the Cardinals for the third wild card seed. One day they'd have it. Another day they'd be a game back and vice versa, bouncing around. So one game does not a sustained, healthy lead make. The Phillies will continue to need to win. And the Padres are a really good team, but it's nice to see that the Phillies got some help on their off day, going from a half game up to a full game up on the Padres in the playoff race in the National League. So that's nice. And the Phillies have an opportunity to add to that lead, or at least contain that lead, tonight when they start a series with the Miami Marlins. Now, we're going to preview everything going on with this series in general because a couple of interesting matchups in this one, especially on the rubber. Tonight, and we'll dive deeper into this in a second, we have Zack Wheeler facing off against, well, stop me if you've heard this name before, because this is another one. The Phillies have been seeing a bunch of pitchers recently that you're not familiar with probably. Braxton Garrett goes for the Miami Marlins. Garrett is 2-5 this year with a 3.88 ERA, 66 Ks, and a 1.16 whip. Now, that ERA says, okay, he hasn't really been that bad. He's a lefty, so you're going to see a lineup that really contains a lot of right-handed bats for the Philadelphia Phillies. If you have the opportunity to keep guys down, I'd imagine we'll probably see Matt Vierling in center. Let me actually pull up and see if we've got the lineup up yet. And yeah, actually, indeed, we do. So here's how the Phillies are going to line up against Braxton Garrett and the Miami Marlins tonight. Kyle Schwarber's going to lead off playing left. Rhys Hoskins going to play first base, batting second. Alec Boehm, third base, batting third. Jay Chiarumito in the cleanup spot catching. Nick Castellanos, designated hitting and batting fifth. Gene Segura, second base, batting sixth. Matt Vierling is actually playing, but he's playing in right field. So you've got Schwarber, Castellanos, and then Vierling in right field. Edmundo Sosa at shortstop. Bryson Stott gets the day off because of that lefty-lefty matchup. Edmundo Sosa gets the chance, and Brandon Marsh plays in center field. Looking just at this game, well, when you compare the numbers, Zack Wheeler is significantly better than Braxton Garrett. So already advantage on the mound. Wheeler is 10-5 this year with a 2.69 ERA. A 1.01 whip in 120 and two-thirds innings, and he struck out 129 batters. 25 walks, 10 home runs given up. Another banner year for Zack Wheeler, who's just become one of the more dominant pitchers in the National League. You look at the Philadelphia Phillies lineup tonight, and it might seem a little bit weird when you get down to the bottom with the bottom three reading Vierling, Sosa, Marsh. But think about it this way. Up the middle, your defense is Gene Segura at second, Edmundo Sosa, who's a defensive specialist at shortstop, Matt Vierling in right field, Brandon Marsh in center field. I know right field isn't technically up the middle, but my point is this is probably the best defensive lineup that the Philadelphia Phillies have rolled out all year. Jay Chiarumito is a plus defender at catcher. Gene Segura is a plus defender at second base. Matt Vierling's a solid defender in right field, two potential plus defender. And Edmundo Sosa and Brandon Marsh are both plus defenders at shortstop and center field, respectively. So even though The offense may be a little bit lower on the totem pole, or I guess higher on the totem pole because lowest on the totem pole is good. Either way, the offense is going to be a little bit less powered up tonight based on the guys in the Phillies lineup, but the defense looks like it could be as good as any game that the Philadelphia Phillies have rolled out this year. The matchup predictor for tonight, 74.4% chance that the Phillies win, according to ESPN Analytics. But there's a little bit of a worry in the back of my mind. Zack Wheeler has faced the Marlins only one time this year, and that time was back in April. He only went 3 innings. He gave up 8 hits and 7 runs in that outing. Now, it was April. It was early in the season, and Wheeler hadn't really recovered from missing a lot of time in spring training, from having that issue with the shoulder, from having the illness, from getting there late. There was a whole lot going on with Zack Wheeler early in the season that he had to bounce back from, and he did an incredible job with it. But the last time the Marlins saw Zack Wheeler, it was not the pitcher that they're going to see tonight. And this also makes me feel like Zack Wheeler, he's going to remember that start and say, hey, I want to shove against this team because I didn't do what my team needed me to do last time I faced them, and I kind of owe them one. All of that points in the favor of the Philadelphia Phillies. Let's preview the rest of the series with the Miami Marlins because I feel like tonight is a significant advantage for the Phillies, and the numbers belay that. Wednesday night's game. Tomorrow night is 7:05. You've got Noah Syndergaard versus Sandy Alcantara. We know how good Alcantara has been this year. He's been absolutely amazing, but in case you need a reminder for the numbers, well, here's all that Alcantara has done on his way to being one of the favorites for National League Cy Young. He's 10-4 on the record with a bad team behind him in the Miami Marlins. He's a 1.88 ERA, good for second in baseball. A 1.41 141 strikeouts, ninth. A .93 whip, fifth. He's just been so good. He's going to throw 100. He's going to throw with movement. He's going to spot up. Sandy Alcantara is very hard to beat. We'll discuss more about that and how that factors into the second part of today's episode coming up in a little bit. But I've got to give the advantage to Miami in Game 2. And then Game 3, you have Kyle Gibson taking the mound for the Philadelphia Phillies at 105 in the series ender against Edward Cabrera. Edward Cabrera has a 2-1 record with a 2.61 ERA, 23 Ks, and a 1.06 whip. Now, when you look at that ERA, okay, yeah, it's pretty good. But then you look at the fact that he's only thrown 47 innings in his career. And so far in 2022, he's thrown 20.2 innings and not even a full 3 games worth, barely over 2 games worth. Yeah, that's not exactly a large sample size. And the teams he's faced, well, Chicago, Washington, Colorado, none of those teams all that good. He has faced Houston, but he was only went 3 2/3 innings there and gave up 5 runs in those 3 2/3 innings. So a young pitcher. He's 24 years of age. Wow, to see a guy 3 years younger than me, that's an old person moment for yours truly. But he's a guy that the Phillies should be able to take advantage of. Excuse me. Getting all choked up thinking about how old and washed up I am, and that at 27, there are guys 3 years younger than me pitching against the Phillies. But anyway, that's a winnable game for the Philadelphia Phillies as well. Advantage Kyle Gibson and the Phillies. So this looks like, based on the pitching matchups and the numbers surrounding the guys on the mound, the Phillies are set to take their, 4th straight series win if they do indeed go to chalk in this one, which means the only series they will have lost in the second half if they take care of business against the Marlins will be that opening sweep by the Chicago Cubs, and then just fire ever since. The Phillies have won 10 of their last 11 games. The Marlins have lost 7 of their last 9 games. This is the meeting of 2 streaking teams, and one is going up, and the other one is going down. Like those sound effects there, I worked on those. Now, the Phillies are streaking in the right direction, though. The Marlins are not. So big advantage for the Philadelphia Phillies in this series that starts tonight, and hopefully they'll take advantage of another team that they should handle. So, hey, we'll see how it goes. But coming up next, they're going to have to take advantage of the Marlins and some easier to beat teams the rest of the way, because we have a tough stretch upcoming for the Philadelphia Phillies when it comes to pitching matchups. This could be the gauntlet of the entire season for the Philadelphia Phillies at the Dish. I'll explain next on the next segment of Locked On Phillies. I want to tell you about Built Bar, though, because if you haven't had Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. You ready? Oh, delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. I just had one of these last night while I was sitting on the couch on the off night. See, I was going to call it a cheat day because it tastes so good, but they're not a cheat day. Listen to some of these numbers. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. It's chewy marshmallow. It's chocolate. The cookie dough tastes just like the stuff that you scoop out of the ice cream when you're eating the cookie dough flavor ice cream. It's so good. Run to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family. It'll be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and just keep them all for yourself. There's collagen protein in them, which means your body absorbs it really well. And who doesn't like cookie dough when it makes you healthy, right? You're going to love the new cookie dough chunk puffs. So go ahead and head over to Built.com, track down your own box, and grab yourself a Built Bar. And when you go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Here is the part of the season for the Philadelphia Phillies where things get a little bit dicey because largely the rest of the way, they have matchups that favor them. Miami, Cincinnati again, Pittsburgh, Arizona, the Giants, Miami, Washington, Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, Washington, beatable teams. There are some tough stretches in there, but maybe none more so than what they're going through coming up this week, especially when you're just looking at what's going on the mound. Now, you face New York, the Mets, that is, for 3 games coming up following this series with the Miami Marlins. That series will start on Friday and be the Phillies Mets up in New York. Then you go to Cincinnati for 3 and then 4 more versus New York. 7 times in a period of 10 games. That's a lot of time against a really good opponent. So the Phillies are going to have to bring their A game, especially considering they're 3-9 against the Mets so far this season. Haven't played them very well, but believe all or most of those times were with Joe Girardi as the manager of this team. So, hey, maybe the Rob Thompson Phillies are different. Here's what I'm talking about when I say the Phillies have a tough stretch coming up, though. So I'll read you some of the names. I'll start by reading you some of the names the Phillies have faced on the mound when it comes to their 10 of the last 11 games winning. Charlie Morton. All right, not bad. Thompson, Underwood Jr., De Los Santos, Brubaker, Nelson, McHugh, Espino, Gray, Corbin, Abbott. These are not top-tier guys. These are guys that are floundering for bad teams, and the Phillies have absolutely taken advantage of them. Just think about the Washington Nationals and what their starting and bullpen pitching looked like this past series. It seemed like they had no chance to get out of the first inning before the Phillies just absolutely ambushed them. And it was great work by the Phillies. Now, some of those guys are still major league pitchers. Paolo Espino, a major league pitcher. Josiah Gray, a major league pitcher. Patrick Corbin, maybe the worst pitcher in the major leagues, but a major league pitcher, a guy who's been at this level for a long time. That being said, they're not exactly Cy Young candidates, any of them. Here's the stretch that the Philadelphia Phillies have coming up that I want you to have an eye on. And it doesn't start tonight. Tonight, you get a chance to have a pretty safe pitching matchup, mainly because Zack Wheeler is a great matchup against anybody, but also because Braxton Garrett is a 25-year-old that doesn't have a lot of major league experience that you have the chance to jump on and take advantage of as a more veteran team facing a younger pitcher. But then following that, Wednesday, the Phillies face Sandy Alcantara, a Cy Young favorite in the National League. Thursday, another regular pitcher with Cabrera that we talked about in the first segment. But then Friday, it's Max Scherzer against the New York Mets. And then Saturday, it's deGrom. So in a 4-game stretch, you're facing Sandy Alcantara, Max Scherzer, and Jacob deGrom. That is a heck of a stretch. And even though you have some good pitchers throwing those days, Syndergaard versus Alcantara, Suarez versus Scherzer, Nola versus deGrom, it looks like that the advantage for pitchers falls on the other side of the seesaw, the other side of the equation. The other team has the advantage, is what I'm trying to say, when it comes to the pitching matchup in all 3 of those games. It's just right into the fire when it comes to where the Philadelphia Phillies are for pitching wise. They're going to go from minor league arms to three of maybe the top 10 arms in baseball right now. It's an absolute murderer's row of matchups on the mound. And not only will seeing the New York Mets in general tell us a lot about where these Philadelphia Phillies are right now, but going into Citi Field and having to face those two guys, yeah, that's going to be a really tough stretch. Now, they go to Cincinnati after that. So 3 games in Cincinnati, but then, well, you're going to be looking at, excuse me, Scherzer, probably again in that 4 game set with New York following Cincinnati. And there's a chance you see deGrom again, depending on how the Mets shake out their series in between. But it could be Scherzer and deGrom twice in a matter of a week and a half, with Alcantara also in there tomorrow night. This is the toughest stretch left of the Philadelphia Phillies season. That's a good thing because then they have the whole month of September to beat up on some bad teams like the Nationals and Diamondbacks and the Cubs again, stuff like that. But frankly, if the Phillies can't take advantage of some of these opportunities or at least look like they belong against these guys, it's going to diminish some of what they've done in the past 11, 12, 13 games, really in the second half when they've been incredibly hot. It won't completely write it off and undo it, but it'll seem a little bit less important that they beat the Pirates and Nationals 4 straight times each if they can't remotely compete against the Mets because of some incredible starting pitching. I don't think that'll be the case. I think the Phillies are going to play a really competitive series up in New York against the Mets. I think they're due to handle the Mets a little bit. And I think this team is so hot right now that this Marlins series, the Mets series, the Reds series, in between the two Mets series, and the 4 game set at home versus the Mets are great opportunities to make up ground in the division and continue to build that wild card lead. But all I'm saying is it is a very different looking week for the Phillies than what they faced last week. No walkthrough games, no easy wins, teams that are much more talented, that are in contention, or if they're not in contention, really, like the Miami Marlins, are throwing a guy who's in Cy Young contention. So buckle up, folks. Pay attention. I missed the Phillies last night. I don't know about you. I was jonesing for some Phillies baseball. Like, what do I do with myself? They're the most exciting show in town right now in Philadelphia, and they're back in action tonight. And the show is going to be even more exciting when you face opponents of that caliber. So that's what we're previewing for the Philadelphia Phillies. And it'll be a fun week to see where these guys stack up. Could you imagine, though, if they win all 3 of these games? The start against Alcantara, deGrom, Scherzer, where we would be mentally with this team? Yeah, I'm losing my mind just thinking about it. So, hey, fun stuff when you play the best, challenging, but rewarding if you can stand up to the challenge. So that's what the Phillies have coming up. Now, what we have coming up is we got to wrap up with Off the Poll from yesterday. I asked you about your expectations for where the Phillies would seed out as far as wild card or playoff positioning in general, and you responded. And I'm interested in what you brought back because it wasn't what I mused that it would be yesterday when you did Off the Poll. So I had placed the poll question out on Twitter. We will recap it next, and I will share my thoughts as to why you all responded how you did as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Let me tell you about my good friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting to scores and podcasts. They've got you completely covered. So head over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline. It's where the game starts. All right, it's time for the second part of Off the Poll. Our first part yesterday was when we posed the question. Now, our Off the Poll segment, where we ask a poll question on Twitter at LO_Phillies, and I retweet it from my account at ConnorThomas975. So shoot both of those accounts a follow if you haven't already. Well, we posed the question, you answered the question. Now we have the results. Let's run through it, starting by reminding you what exactly we asked. So our Off the Poll question for this week was, if the Phillies make the playoffs, where do you expect them to end up seeding-wise? There were 4 options: the 3rd wildcard spot, the 2nd wildcard spot, the 1st wildcard spot, or as NL East champion. Those are really the only ways the Phillies can make it in. And we're not talking about if they're the NL East champion, where did they seed in, how many win? No, just how do they get into the playoffs if they do indeed get in. Now, I imagined, and I brought this up on yesterday's episode, there would kind of be a reverse pyramid. The third wild card would get the most votes because it's the most safe and conservative, and then second, then first, and NL East. It would build out that way. Not the case at all. Not remotely the case. There is actually a runaway winner, and it was not the third wild card spot. Now, 24% of you said that the third wild card spot is where you expect the Phillies to end up. But 58% of you are saying that the second wild card is the expected position for the Philadelphia Phillies. Wow. Are you telling me nearly 60% of fans right now are saying that the second wild card spot is the most likely, with teams like the Padres and the Braves hanging around right there that you're dealing with? That's something interesting. We'll discuss that in a second. 13% of you said the first wild card spot is where you expect them, and 5% are saying that the NL East championship is still on the board. I don't think that's the case, and I can see why that is the least. But it's interesting to me that the second wild card spot is where you're favoring the Phillies to end up if we go with the majority. I would say the third wild card spot is the expected, because when I look at the San Diego Padres, well, the Padres are a more talented team on paper since the addition of Juan Soto and Josh Bell. Does more talented on paper mean that they're the better team in practice? Absolutely not. The most talented team does not always win the World Series. The most talented team does not always win the most games. There's a chance that the Padres take time to gel and figure out how to hit behind each other, and they've got to figure out locker room stuff and everything like that. Tatis Jr. coming back isn't fully warmed up, and they end up in the third wild card spot. I mean, that's realistic. The Padres have been on a skid recently, so I can see why people feel that way. But when I look at them on paper, they just look like a better team than the Philadelphia Phillies. Phillies are the hotter team right now, but the Padres have the more talented names. That's why I would go third wild card spot. But I guess people are looking at it saying, yeah, that NL West is a tough division. Padres got to focus on the Dodgers a bunch. The Padres got to play the Giants, who are still a solid team. Now the Rockies and Diamondbacks are no good, but the Padres have a bit of a tough schedule the rest of the way. And with that, the Phillies don't. So if the Phillies continue on this hot stretch, yeah, they could hang in this second wild card spot. And I also think some of it has to do with someone looking and saying, oh, well, the Phillies are in the second wild card spot now. I imagine them to tread water and stay where they are. So stagnant is often the default. What I mean by that is seeing what place the Phillies are in now, a lot of people feel that they can just tread water and be in that place. I don't know that that's totally realistic. They're going to have to have a pretty darn good rest of the second half to get that second wild card spot, but it's clearly realistic. They're in the spot now. The Padres are fumbling, and now my perspective has changed because I see that 58% of the responders to this poll are saying that that is the realistic expectation for the Philadelphia Phillies if and when they make it into the playoffs. So, hey, that's good. People are high on this team, and I love it. And maybe I'm just third wild carding it because I just want them to get in. I've seen collapses of the past with Phillies teams over the past 3 years or so. I possibly could be looking at that and just saying, hey, I'll take the third wild card, and we'll see what happens when they get in. But clearly this fan base has become more ambitious. And thank you for sharing your votes with me so that I know how this fan base is looking. That's the point of Off the Poll. I learned something new about the way people are viewing this Phillies team right now. And now we can approach with that information these next couple games and the tough stretch we were talking about. And that's all I've got for you for today's Locked On Phillies. It's about time to go get ready for Game 1 against the Marlins. So we'll have that coming up and a recap of that game tomorrow, along with a preview of Game 2 and something fun for stepping off since it's a Wednesday episode. That'll be done tomorrow, but that's all my time for you for today. Thank you again for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sully, he's got some great storylines to talk about, including how hot your Philadelphia Phillies have been, but he's covering Major League Baseball in general. Great stories, great history of the game that he knows all about. Check out Sully's amazing work on Locked On MLB. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. That's all I've got for you. Please make sure to rate, review, subscribe. throw us some likes on Twitter, throw us some follows on Twitter, keep everything going on the social medias, because that is how not only do we get feedback that way, but it helps us continue to grow the podcast. So I appreciate everyone doing that, and I appreciate you all joining me and listening to today's Locked On Phillies. I will talk to you all for our next episode tomorrow.